Hi, fabulous students. Today we're going to talk about solving one-step equations. Take a look at this balance. What would go in the envelope marked X? If you said 4, you're correct. In order to keep this balanced, we have 7 marbles on this side. We have 3 outside of the envelope, so we would need to have 4 inside the envelope to have 7 on both sides. I like to think of solving equations like taking care of twins. If I give one twin cookies and the other none, there will be trouble. So we want to think about what we give to one side, we need to give to the other. So what you give to one twin, you need to give to the other just to keep things fair. Before we get started, we need to review some properties. So I'd like you to pause the video and see if you can come up with some examples of each of these properties. The identity property of addition is when we add 0 to any number and get the identical number back. The identity property of multiplication is when we multiply by 1. Remember, 1 is a really magic number in algebra, so always keep that in mind. 3 times 1 equals 3. The inverse property of addition is when we take 3 plus its opposite, which is -3, or its inverse, and we get 0. And the inverse property of multiplication is when we take 1/2 times 2/1, and we get 1. So keep all these properties in mind because they're really, really important. So let's look at the addition property of equality first. In order to isolate x, we need to have x plus 0. So what number would I add to 3.5, negative 3.5, in order to get 0? So the addition property of equality, when we're subtracting, we're going to add 3.5 to both sides. This gives us x plus 0 is equal to 7.53. So now we have x is equal to 7 53/100ths. Remember, when you're adding decimals, we need to line up the ones place, the tenths, and the hundredths. And if you're in doubt, think about money. When we encounter the subtraction property of equality, this is the sophisticated way of saying subtracting the same number from both sides of the equation. So to solve this equation, we need to say y plus, we want to have y by itself, so we need to have a 0 next to it. So I'm going to subtract 5.6, negative. So subtract 5.6 or add a negative 5.6. Now I'm going to encounter a problem if I put my 5.6 here. So to make this a little easier, I'm going to place it above 1.5. The absolute value of negative 5.6 is greater than the absolute value of 1.5. So you want to subtract the numbers that way. Remember, when the numbers have opposite signs, we subtract. So we have 6 minus 5 is 1, and negative 5 plus 1 is negative 4, equals y plus 0. So this is equal to y is equal to negative 4.1. And if I want to check my work, I can substitute negative 4.1 in for y and see if the equation is actually balanced. Recall that if you have minus a negative, that's the same as saying plus. Okay, it's like saying negative 1 times negative 5.6. So this is y plus 5.6 is equal to 1.5. So I can solve that the same way as this other equation. The next property is the multiplication property of equality, and we use this when we want to undo division. Look at these two equations. Are they the same? If you said yes, you're correct. This is like saying -1 times r divided by 4, and this is saying r divided by -1 times 4. So both r divided by 4 is negative because there just needs to be one negative in front. So let's solve this. We have r divided by -4 is equal to 1/7. So this time we want to use our identity property of multiplication. We want to get a 1 in front of the r. We want to isolate r. And r is isolated when it's 1 times r. So we're going to multiply both sides by -4. Notice that I'm putting the -4 in the numerator, not the denominator. Okay, if we put it in the denominator, it would be like we are multiplying by -1/4, and that wouldn't be correct. So -4 divided by -4 is what number? If you said it's the magic number 1, you are correct. So we have 1 times r is equal to r, and r is equal to -4/7. The division property of equality helps us undo multiplication. We have -4 times x, so we're going to divide both sides by -4, and we get x is equal to 38 divided by -4. And we always want to simplify this number. So -4 goes into 38 9 times, so we have -9, and 4 times 9 is 36, so we have 2 left over. So when we fully reduce this fraction, we get -9.5. How do you think we would solve this equation? You might say divide both sides by 4/5 because you're multiplying these two. But there's actually an easier way to look at this. So let's review. If you divide both sides by a fraction, you would have 8/9 divided by 4/5. But that's actually the same as saying 8/9 times 5/4. So to save ourselves some time and effort, which is always important, we want to multiply by the inverse instead. So when we multiply both sides by 5/4, 4/5 times 5/4 is 1, and 1 times k is equal to k. So remember, we want k to be isolated, and so we want it to be 1 times k, which will be equal to k. So multiplying by the inverse is much easier than dividing by 4/5. If this isn't making a lot of sense to you, why don't you take a moment and pause the video and actually try this out and see what you get. So we have k, 1k, is equal to 5/4 times 8/9. Recall that the commutative property allows us to switch positions. So we could have 8 times 5 is equal to divided by 4 times 9. So what's 8 divided by 4? Well, that gives us 2/1 times 5/9. So k is equal to 10/9. And you can keep your answer as an improper fraction. Remember that you don't have to go through this whole process of showing the commutative property. So let's take a look at how much easier it is when we just multiply. So we get k, and we can reduce, okay, using that commutative property. That's the y in this. So we can take 5 times 2, which is 10/9. Okay, or if you want to change it to 1 and 1/9, that's fine, but typically we don't have to do that unless it's a word problem. So now you're going to solve some problems in your notebook, and you're also going to answer some questions on the Google form. So go ahead and go to the Google form and answer these problems in your notebook, and there's some questions associated with that on the Google form. Hope you have a great rest of the day.